So again, I think we are live now, so I'll start a little early than scheduled. So once again, my name is Mamu Katsereteli. I'm a head of America-Georgia Business Council and also a senior fellow at Central Asia Caucasus Institute at American Foreign Policy Council. I'm also wine promoter and obviously Georgian wine promoter. And we are here for second session of third Ghvino Forum, which is will be focused on different aspects of business and economics of wine. And we'll start our session with two wine professionals who travel to Georgia and know Georgia through wines, but also they're professionals of the business. They're selling wines on a daily basis, and they interact with customers, so they know what Georgian wines, what type of reactions Georgian wines get in a public, audience, in a very vibrant, I would say, Washington D.C. market, wine market. Our speakers are Ali THORNBURN, beverage manager at Tail Up Goat, and Bill JENSEN, owner and sommelier at Tail Up Goat and Revelers Hour. As I said, they're familiar with different Georgian wines. They've visited different Georgian wineries, so they know both ends of production side of Georgian wines. They've visited wineries, and they also know what market look like and what this market is asking for. So I prolonged my introductory speech to make sure that it's 3 o'clock so that everybody else who wanted to join us is joining. So Bill, why don't you start your part of perceptions and impressions and your passion to wine in general and Georgian wine.
Gamarjoba. Thank you for having us. I myself am not Georgian. Ali, are you Georgian yourself? No, Ali, neither of us is Georgian. Yet we both love Georgian wine, and through our roles as wine professionals, have come to a deeper appreciation of the people, the place, the culture that Georgian wine is such an incredible part of. I think it's a fascinating country, Georgia, and I will say that it is obviously new on the radar of most Americans when it comes to wine, which is incredibly ironic given that Georgia and the other Transcaucasian countries very much the birthplace of wine as we know it. But in terms of wine on the radar of the average American drinker, that is a process that is very much still evolving. Just as kind of a personal story, kind of my story in Georgian wine. I will say that the part of what I love about wine is discovering new cultures, and part of what I seek out for our guests is value for the sake of the wines that they're drinking. And that's how I originally discovered Georgian wine, at first working at a smaller Mediterranean restaurant, and then owning and managing the list along with Ali at Tail Up Goat. And it should be said that for those of you that aren't familiar with our businesses, we are located in Washington D.C.
And I forgot to mention that it's a Michelin star restaurant. So
Ali is sitting in the Michelin starred restaurant in the storage room. I am sitting in the booth at the non-Michelin starred restaurant, which is newer. But we sell quite a bit of Georgian wine at both establishments. I can remember that John Wardman's wine, Pheasant's Tears, was one of the first bottles that I had there at Katsateli. And I can remember it tasted nothing like any of the other wines that were on the market at that point in time. It had this textural quality to it that was utterly different. It had this searing acid, this kind of almost exotic fruit structure. And for me, it was the drink itself, apart from its Georgian origins that drew me in. But there's so much to unpack with Georgian wine as well. And, it was one of those, glasses of wine that was delicious, on its face, but, I instantly wanted to know more about. And that, began a journey that ultimately culminated in, getting an invitation to go to Georgia with the American importer, Chris Terrell. And, that just kind of deepened my relationship with the country. And, additionally, I developed a friendship with Noel Brockett, who operates Georgian Wine House in DC. So we're very fortunate in this market to have access to a lot of those wines and to have access to, wines made by smaller producers and wines made the old way. Wines made in Kvevery, wines made with a minimal amount of intervention, that speak to a sense of place. And then, I think we're very lucky also to get wines from the entire country. So, we're not just dealing with wines from Kakheti, we're dealing with wines from, all of the Georgian regions, and we get a sense of, the variety of wine that, is available in Georgia. And, I think a lot of consumers are only familiar with the Kakhetian style of wine, and Kakheti is a very hot, dry climate, so those are big wines. But I think it's important, for us as wine professionals to make sure that our guests know that Georgia has so much more to offer than just those, densely extracted, tannic wines, which can be delicious, but there are lighter styles available as well, which are equally lovely. I'm going to kind of circle back to some of those themes, but I wanted to give Ali a chance quickly to talk about her own journey in Georgian wine. As a non-Georgian, Ali, how did you come to love these wines and sell them in our restaurant?
Well, yeah, I think while I had been generally familiar with skin contact wine, definitely working at Till It Goat, and also working within a wine community. There's so many restaurants in DC. We have such a great community of restaurants that are featuring these wines, and kind of getting to know other wine professionals in the city that are just as passionate. So going out to eat was a big way that I was exposed to them. And then, of course, going to Georgia. To humble brag about Bill, my boss, for a moment, I was sent on a trip to Georgia because he actually won a blind Georgian varietal tasting, and he had just returned from Georgia, so he sent me on the trip.
It was at our very first Ghvino Forum in Washington,
DC.
It was,
yeah, Supra. So that is how I ended up on the trip, and I think it just further, when you meet the people and you see the land and you see where the varietals are coming from, and to me, wines it's storytelling, and especially connecting with guests in that way. It's about telling the stories. And so to be able to have stories of my own to tell and to share with guests, to really personalize the experience, that just really kind of deepened my love and appreciation for the region.
And I would say, also Georgia is at this fascinating moment in its, winemaking history. So, and it's at the, exists at the confluence of, these geopolitical forces and then, larger cultural forces. So, obviously the Georgians had a very tumultuous birth into the kind of post-communist era. The 90s were essentially a lost decade, and then in the aughts, there's the Russian embargo and ultimately the Russian war. And, the, kind of happy accident of especially the embargo and the war for Georgians was that it forced them to, look east and west as opposed to north for additional markets for their wines. And it also forced them to, think about their artisanal wines as their greatest, export and product. And then, more broadly, internationally, you have this global slow food movement. You have, global kind of organic food movement and a global natural wine movement. And, Georgia, is just a really natural part of that story. And a lot of those narratives, kind of begin and end in Georgia. And if you want to understand, how to make wine without a lot of intervention and, how to make wine in more kind of, historic styles with whites on the skins, ultimately all roads lead to Georgia. And, it's very exciting for me to see, individual Georgian winemakers and also the Georgian government in investing as heavily as they are in that. And then, the other piece of the story for me is that, Georgia has a very unique, ethnic perspective, culture. And I think, the challenge for, those ethnic enclaves in America is, kind of transcending, that niche. So it's getting to this point where, you can find Georgian wines at any kind of restaurant and not just a Georgian restaurant. And I think, the fun thing about that for the sake of Georgian wine is that the textures of the wines, the flavor profiles, they lend themselves to a lot of different types of food in a way that, makes them very versatile and allows them to, just break out of that, kind of unique, Georgian, ethnic enclave kind of box and appeal to a variety of different people. So, for us, our cuisine is very much Southern Mediterranean. It's kind of Greco-Roman, yet, the flavors, that we work with on a daily basis work really well, with the flavors of Georgian wines. And Ali, I think, I'll let you speak to that because you're kind of running the roost at Tail Up Goat. We, for the sake of pandemic, have kind of pivoted our model at Tail Up Goat, and we are adopting more of a tasting menu format with wine pairings. Ali, what do you like about working with Georgian wines in the context of a wine pairing?
So especially in the context of the food that comes out of our kitchen, a lot of times it is a complete dish. I say it's like a full circle and everything, and it's more how to add onto that circle without disrupting the dish as it's intended. And I find that when there's a lot of diversity of flavors on one plate, which is very similar to dining in Georgia, there's so much diversity on the plate and so many different flavor profiles. Sometimes a skin contact wine, amber wine, actually more often than not can be the solution to that because, in white wines, a lot of times what you're looking for is that brightness, that crispness, apricot and apples and those flavor profiles. But what they may lack body or depth or tannin, especially. So because you're able to kind of in skin contact in amber wines, find both of those flavor profiles that may be absent in a red wine or the texture that may be lacking in a white wine. They bridge that gap really well, and for the sake of our menu right now and doing wine pairings, we found them to be very successful.
And do you find that guests are largely receptive to drinking Georgian wine, or do you get a lot of kind of furrowed brows, people thinking that you're talking about the state as opposed to the country?
I think if we had been doing this 3, 4, 5 years ago, that would be the case. I think we have kind of become a destination now, and people are looking to explore more interesting and diverse wines just because that's, what we've become known for. So yeah, when your final dish is a steak and people want a big juicy Cabernet and you're like, here's your kisi hikvi, yeah, you could get an eyebrow raise, certainly. But I think people are more willing to trust us. And when they try it, when they put the wine in their mouth, when they get the wine in the glass, which I think is always the key, is to get the wine in front of the guest, then they kind of have that, that aha moment. And that's really the point, is the aha moment. So we've had more kind of aversion prior to trying, and maybe more like, oh, really? Prior to trying the wine. But once the wine is in the glass, more often than not, people are intrigued and want more.
So I'll give a question here from Erica Frey. You referenced the highly controversial kisi hikvi steak pairing that we unveiled, that I felt very strongly about, that you equally were excited about. And it should be said that part of the reason that pairing worked is because the steak was served with this like peppery watercress sauce, And, you know, Kisi and Kikbi, they both have this kind of like peppery tonality to them that worked with the sauce. So, you know, a lot of times with pairings, I find you pair as much with the sauce as you do the protein. And so, you know, that like peppercorn dimension worked really nicely with the cress, and then the structure of the tannic structure of the wine worked with the steak. Are there any other, you know, Erica wants to know if there are any other specific food pairings that, you know, are just go-tos for us at the restaurant? With Georgia.
Anytime that we work with a lot of like earthy, smoky flavors, we see a lot in the restaurant, like smoked mushrooms and things like that. I think those play really well with skin contact wine. You referenced anything herbal. We have a lot of like salsa verdes and sauces of that nature that you also see a lot in Georgian cuisine. A lot of those kind of coriander-based sauces and things like that that I think play really nicely with skin contact wine. And it's a nice way to kind of reference flavors that we know, you know, the old adage, if it grows together, it goes together, reference those flavors and kind of start there and then see where the journey takes you in terms of pairing. But I think we've had a success with a variety of dishes from a variety of kind of culinary walks and pairing them with skin contact wine.
Yeah, and I would say too, you know, Georgia is a country the size of West Virginia, but it's incredibly varied in terms of, you know, the landscapes, the individual terroirs, the grape varietals. You know, so there are ethereal, you know, Loire Valley-like bracingly acidic, you know, citrusy, you know, whites in parts of Georgia, and then, you know, there are massive, you know, tannic fruit bombs, you know, and so I think the other thing that excites us about working with Georgian wine is that, you know, there is just a little bit of everything. And I think, you know, sometimes too, it's a set of wines that colors outside the lines a little bit, you know, for the sake of those textures. So you get, you know, a wine that has, you know, some of the fruit qualities that you might typically expect of a white, but, you know, some of the, you know, tannic structure of a red, and that can be, you know, a really useful, you know, kind of skeleton key at times. Erica was also curious about what stories resonate with guests. I find that you know, I try to not go to the when I was in Georgia well too much. You know, I think it gives you an air of expertise, but, you know, I feel like if you go back to that well too much, then, you know, it just kind of erodes the, you know, significance of the story, and it can make you sound a little, you know, I don't know. Yeah. What works for you the best?
It's really interesting lately, especially because there's been so many canceled trips and so many people have been telling me a lot of like their own, like I was actually quite a few people were supposed to be in Georgia this spring, which is really exciting to hear about, that we actually have a lot of people that had intended to travel on vacation. So there's been a lot of like connecting with people about that. My favorite story that I like to tell in the when I was in Georgia story is Michelet Chonas Marani was talking to us as a group about how his wine was featured in a DC restaurant, and it turned out to be our DC restaurant. So he was talking about Tail of Goat, unbeknownst to either of us, that, you know, I was there and he was talking about the restaurant, which was really cool to see that. To see.
You're talking about Chonas Marani, Misha. Yeah.
Yes. His excitement about being featured in our restaurant, and I was just as excited to be talking to him about his wines. So, you know, it's kind of a running joke now that anytime anyone is selling one of Chona's wines in the restaurant, they like make me go open it and talk about him. So that's been kind of like one of the, you know, really, really personal, amazing connections that was forged that I talk about.
By the way, one important thing that probably, first of all, let me say a few words. There is a great camaraderie among restaurants in DC area, and professionals are in close collaboration and partnerships, and they work together, which is great to see in this time and era, definitely. That's number one. Number two, on the point that Bill said earlier. So in a sense, Georgian wines preceded Georgian restaurant in DC. So there were popularity of Georgian wines in your and some other restaurants actually made some people to think about opening Georgian restaurants. So that was, by the way, contribution. But another element I wanted to, because this session, on the second part of the session will be about business and also economic impact and development impact of these wines. I wanted to just thank you for selling Georgian wines because, and promoting it, because sometimes you don't realize that by selling each bottle sold in DC restaurant helps producers in the country. So there is this, you mentioned Jonah or some other producers that you carry. So there's a growing number of small wineries exporting in the US because people like you sell these wines. So you have to be proud of this connection as well, so that don't lose that touch in your stories for yourself. I'm not talking about telling this to customers necessarily, but maybe it's good to tell it to customers as well. But every bottle they buy, they help somebody who produces this great quality wine at relatively, as you said earlier, the price value is very reasonable.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
Bill, what do you say about that?
For a lot of the winemakers in Georgia, a lot of them are, they're working other jobs, and winemaking, they have a smaller Marani, and, they can't make a full living just off of making wine. So there's a real through line, for every bottle that we sell back to individual producers for the sake of the smaller houses, because this is the way you make wine traditionally in Georgia. It's very difficult to scale up. It's hugely labor intensive, and it is essentially an artisanal product. And our ability to sell Chona's wines mean that potentially he can devote all of his time to winemaking, as opposed to having to supplement his income. And that's an amazing gift to the Georgian wine industry. And then it inspires more of Chona's neighbors, hopefully, to start bottling their own wine, or make additional investments in the vineyard. And so it's really, I think, with other goods, you're a few steps removed from the producer. But with a lot of these Georgian wines, it's Noel or Chris Terrell, or it's like one person that's the intermediary, and then you get straight to the producer thereafter. And I think for Ali and I to have the connections that we do with some folks over there, it's really special to be able to close that loop in the same way that our chef would close the loop with his farmers. And I think it's really important that we in the wine industry start to think of wine more as an agricultural product, and less as a luxury good. And I love that about Georgian. That's one of my favorite things about Georgian wine culture, is that there's no Romani Conti of Georgia. There's no air of pretension that comes with everybody makes wine. It's not a sanctified special thing. Everybody makes wine. Like, a lot of the older generation is hugely skeptical of wine in glass bottles because that equals Soviet wine to them. And a lot of people, you go to their home, they're going to have a huge plastic demijohn of wine. And it is a really special part of the culture there, in a way that I haven't experienced anywhere else. Maybe in like parts of Greece, parts of southern Italy, but it's just part of the fabric of life. And I think for me, that is what I love most about wine. It's not I've had some lovely expensive bottles, but what makes it special is the way that Georgians enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a people's product. So
yes, yeah.
It's people's product, yeah. In terms of, again, looking at the kind of, from your business perspective, so I know that you represent, while your restaurant is very hard to get in and very popular and so forth, it's not the kind of another kind of regular restaurant in town. So you represent pretty special sort of both way you treat your food and you treat your wine. So it's pretty special. So, but wines like Georgian wines, are they? I assume they are contributing to this your business model. So that's what I wanted to ask you to talk about. So how this fits your business model, if you talk about business model of the restaurant.
I think Like Ali said, I think it is, made us a destination for people that, want to seek out new and different wines. In terms of pricing out pairings, I think Georgian wine is really useful because, it's not hugely expensive, largely. So, and it's wonderfully versatile, and it has, cachet, and it has a story. And I think, for us at the restaurant, I like to be transparent about the fact that obviously people are paying, more for a wine with us than they would at a retail store. And, hopefully what we add is, context, is that storytelling piece, and is, curation. It allows people to, find things that they wouldn't find otherwise. Ali, do you see Jonas here?
I just saw him waving us.
I think it's thrilling, it's exciting, and so I worry less about people feeling like they got a good value out of a Georgian wine at a restaurant than I do, honestly, like $150 Premier Cru Burgundy, because it sounds weird, but it's actually harder in a lot of ways to find $150 Premier Cru that feels like a good value than it is to find a really exciting, Georgian wine these days. But, as you said, we're not a typical restaurant. We, even, within restaurants of our caliber, we're, we take the food very seriously, but we're a little more casual and, for the sake of the wine list, pretty irreverent. So, we're a bit of a unicorn that way. But I think, our hope always is that, in our own way, we're telling our own stories about what we love, and hopefully we push the market in that direction. Ali, are there any other what other restaurants in the city do you feel like do a really good job of that for the sake of Georgian wine?
I think Maxwell Park is always kind of displaying them in a really interesting way. I think that Rose, is doing a great job at both Maidan and Compass Rose. I know Compass Rose has kind of always had a Georgian offering by the glass, which is really nice. And I think that is another thing from an economic standpoint that is, if you're going out on a limb and maybe having something you haven't had before, the fact that these aren't, cost prohibitive wines is really nice. If you have a wine that's, under $20 by the glass, people are much more inclined to kind of like take a risk on it. So for, a kind of like more of a bar initially, like Compass Rose, to just have that casually on the list, and you could just go and order a glass and not feel, the pressure that goes along with ordering a bottle that you might not be into, or spending a lot of money on something, I think is really nice. Yeah. So and then I think obviously Supra is awesome with the entire Georgian wine list. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, Bill.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Washington is a very amazing and unique market too, because it's there's a lot of disposable income here, as there is in a lot of cities, but it's also a very international, highly educated, demographic. And I think people are very willing to try out new things. And at this moment in time, like Ali said, people are, willing to try a new wine, as a, alternative to being able to take a trip. We're very lucky in that sense. And I don't, I'm kind of in the thick of it here, and I don't know how representative our market is of other major U.S. cities or smaller U.S. cities or what have you. But my hope is that these smaller producers continue to gain traction stateside, and there is a larger and larger market for their wines. But by the same token, like I don't want the average Georgian Cozzatelli to cost 30 bottles retail or like wholesale a bottle. I like that there is value, and I don't want it to become something it's not. So I think what is very special about Georgia is the culture of hospitality, but also the fact that it is still a land that is opening itself up, and there are a lot of challenges that come with that. As a culture, how do you open yourself up and stay true to yourselves and remain approachable? And so I think Georgia was at that moment. I think obviously the pandemic has made that harder for them, but I think it's really exciting to see Georgia become more of a destination, and people increasingly appreciate the food culture and the wine culture there.
Thank you, Bill. I think in this time of COVID and pandemic, we had this conference planned for physical meeting as I mentioned earlier today at UC Davis in California, and we expected to have obviously not just a meeting of people and science discussion, but also lots of wine tastings and so forth. Unfortunately, we could not do it. So we narrowed it down to some presentations, but without this portion of this discussion that Ali and you contributed to, I think I would live with the sense that we didn't talk about wine at all. So it's absolutely essential that people who deal with wine, who are passionate about wine, to be part of this conference and forum, or Ghvino Forum as we call it. So hopefully in the future we'll have more in-person meetings, and but most importantly, lots of good tastings, and even more importantly, many more trips to Georgia to explore unexplored. As our good friend Lisa Granik is saying, best Georgian wines are still to be made. So